and experts and professors who will somehow try to unpin this topic from their own point of view. At the beginning, I would like to give a floor to Ms. Suzanne Schaefer, Assistant Public Affairs Officer at the Embassy of the United States of America here in Podgorica. Suzanne arrived in Podgorica and she joined the Embassy in Podgorica in 2022. Prior to join the State Department, Suzanne worked in several nonprofit organizations in the Washington, D.C. area. And she spent 4 years managing communications and public affairs for the foreign policy program in Brookings Institution. Suzanne holds a BA in political science from Indiana University. She speaks Spanish, French, and she's learning Serbo-Croatian. Suzanne, thank you very much for managing to join us today. Please, I would like to give you a floor, so join us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Hvala vam puno. So I'm happy to be here with you today virtually for this conference and connect on this important topic of cultural diplomacy. Which is really at the core of what I do as a diplomat at the U.S. Embassy in Podgorica, and particularly for the Public Affairs Office. So we all know that art connects people across borders and does not need really much interpretation. And so it's the ideal platform for building these people-to-people ties and sharing common values, which I think is the essence of public diplomacy and the essence of what I do at the embassy. Throughout history, artists have used their craft to address cultural issues and spur societal change. And so in diplomacy, art and culture are invaluable tools for fostering a mutual understanding, which is really what we're trying to do. So this is why the US State Department really values and supports initiatives that engage with the arts. And I'd like to give you guys a couple examples of recent initiatives that we've done in the public diplomacy section. Recent programming that kind of, I think, exemplifies this idea of art and diplomacy. So just this week, I actually attended the final event for what was called the Arts for Social Change, You Are Right series of workshops, which were conducted at our American Corner space in Podgorica. And this was an embassy-funded program where 2 local artists drew inspiration from influential American artists and their techniques to engage participants in discussions about critical issues facing Montenegro. And then those participants then produced some thought-provoking artworks in support of the ideas of diversity, inclusion, and human rights. And then they exhibited those. And I'll mention here a little bit about our American Corners that I mentioned, which are based in Podgorica, Cetinje, and Plevlja. And those corners really create organizational partnerships between the United States and foreign cultural centers, in this case with Montenegro, with the express goal of fostering these ongoing people-to-people ties between the United States and foreign audiences. So for here, of course, we're focused on this relationship that we have with Montenegro. So through their programming and their events, our corners are kind of an avenue to build bridges between Montenegro and the United States and increase understanding, increase collaboration, partnership. And oftentimes those programs really are focused on the arts, as that exhibition demonstrated, as well as this kind of broad idea of culture. Another great example, I think, was also just last week. I attended with the ambassador, Judy Rising-Ranke, a panel discussion on the social role of culture and heritage. And this was the final event of the Museums and Galleries of Podgorica's 2021 Democracy Commission funded project titled Heritage of Equality. So this event was at the museum. It was an embassy funded program, and it really looked at, or tried to kind of promote these ideas of human rights, coexistence, and gender equality. But it did that through a series of workshops that explored the museum's archives and collections. So it used the art and the resources that the museum had related to these issues, and then that's kind of how the dialogue was conducted. And then another really kind of standout program that we do that's really connected to art and diplomacy that I'd like to mention is the U.S. Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation, which supports the preservation of the host country's cultural heritage. So for example, over the years, the US Embassy has funded preservation projects across Montenegro. Namely, it has an ongoing restoration project of a collection of icons from the 17th to 19th centuries. And then it's also helping to restore part of the UNESCO protected Old City of Kotor Wall, which I believe is called the Saint Franjo artillery point from the 16th century. So this fund is a way to consider ways, and its whole purpose is to consider ways in which art and culture can advance social cohesion and can kind of strengthen our ties while also having a lot of added benefits like boosting the economy, ensuring sustainability of a cultural site, and things like that. I think art exchanges are another kind of obvious way, another great example of how diplomats use art to reach their audiences. For instance, we have what's called the Arts Envoy program, which engages American artists and art professionals through cultural exchange programs. And it shares kind of the best of what we in the United States have to offer in terms of artists to again foster that cross-cultural understanding and collaboration and communicate some key ideas that we want to communicate. So American artists over the years have visited Montenegro to perform for local audiences and conduct workshops. And I was lucky this summer to be able to attend the premiere performance of a new musical composition, or several musical compositions that were created as part of our embassy supported project called Cultural Intertwining, Strengthening Montenegrin American Ties Through Music and Cultural Heritage. So this was a really cool project because it promoted cultural collaboration by bringing two young Montenegrin musicians and two young American musicians together. And the four of them, along with a few other people involved in the project, created these really cool new musical compositions that kind of looked at each culture's heritage and tried to celebrate both of those together. And then they performed both here in Montenegro and in the United States. And then we, vice versa, have programs like One Beat, which is another exchange that brings musicians from different countries to the United States. So we both bring Americans here and we bring Montenegrins to America. And this just kind of creates this global network of young leaders. But they're using musical collaboration and artwork and things like that as their means of cross-cultural exchange. But really, when I think of art and diplomacy and culture, it really goes beyond just painting or drawing or things that are really obviously art. Because culture includes a lot of things in society, including art, but also beliefs, education, religion, food, clothing, customs, our languages. So there's so many things that you can kind of consider, I think, art and diplomacy, all of these human things. And in that sense, I think cultural diplomacy kind of goes beyond art. And we do so many, specifically through the public affairs section of the embassy, so many academic and cultural exchanges kind of across all of those fields, both at the high school level, university, professional levels. And really the end goal is to strengthen our people-to-people ties. That is the mission, to share our ideas, establish understanding, shared values, things like that. The ultimate goal is supporting our foreign policy goals, but doing that by strengthening a mutual cooperation rather than other methods that are out there. So in essence, I think cultural diplomacy works by connecting on a more personal level with people of a nation. We're not going out necessarily and talking to the top politicians or leaders. We're out there hanging out with individuals in society. And so through our cultural diplomacy efforts, the Public Affairs Office at the US Embassy is really striving to empower individuals in Montenegro, empower a pro-European Montenegro, and support a strong and resilient democracy through its people, through the individuals. And as allies, that is really important to both of our countries. It's important to the United States. Montenegro is a great ally of ours. And so those are kind of that I would say is really why I do what I do in the public affairs office. And I can kind of get the fun job of hanging out with the locals in Montenegro, speaking Montenegrin very badly, and then letting my political colleagues kind of take the more boring meetings. So I think public diplomacy is a really excellent field. It's really important. And so I thank you so much for having me talk a little bit about it today at this conference.
Thank you very much, and this is a good point that you said. I know that you're you guys very active here, and it's important that you mentioned that cultural diplomacy is much more active on a personal level. So it's and it's reshaping its meaning in a theoretical sense and in practical sense. Actually, the cultural diplomacy, it's less elite to elite communication, and it's much more a many to many approach. So actually, it is one very important tool for all of us. So thank you so much for your insight today and for your words. Our first session is the role of artistic expression and artistic results in the promotion of country's culture. Within this conference, we had several topics, and this topic became the most interesting for many speakers. And I would like that you stay in our session and maybe hear our colleagues and friends who will now speak. The first speaker in this session is Nikola Mijović, and the title of his presentation is "I'm Cuba, Revolutionary Aesthetics and the Politics of Transnational Cinema." Nikola Mijović is a film director whose first feature film as co-director, co-writer, and co-producer, Borders Raindrops from 2018, has been screened at more than 20 international film festivals, including Sarajevo, Montreal, Göteborg, Bergamo, winning a number of awards. He has also directed several short films and is currently in the process of developing his second feature with support from Film Center Montenegro. In his approach to film practice, Nikola combines fiction with ethnographic detail. His work is driven by social issues and an interest in marginalized or underrepresented groups. In addition to this, he has conducted research in the field of film studies with a special focus of national and international cinemas, Yugoslav and post-Yugoslav film, fashion, consumption, and digital media. Nikola, I would like to give you a floor now. Before everything, I would like to say that every session will will go in a row, and after that we will have several minutes for discussion. Everybody who is interested to ask some questions to our participants will have a chance to write their message in the chat, and I will be in a position to read that out. So, Nikola, please. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this session. This is a subject that I find really, really interesting and important, and I know currently it's a big subject for all of us. I decided to take a historical view and do a little bit of kind of excavation, though, and look at the historical example of cultural diplomacy in the context of cinema, which I hope will be quite insightful for everyone. I've prepared some slides, which I hopefully will be able to share with you, which might make it easier for everyone to follow. Okay, so it looks like it's all working. Shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. So the title of my presentation is I Am Cuba, and I'll be looking at revolutionary aesthetics and the politics of transnational cinema in relation to this film, which was made in the 1960s, which I'll be using as a case study. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see some details about the context. and the Soviet poster for the film here. I Am Cuba was produced jointly in collaboration between Cuban Revolutionary Institute of Cinematographic Art and Industry and the leading Soviet state-sponsored studio Mosfilm in 1964. That's the year when it was released. So the production started only a couple of years after the failed CIA-supported invasion at the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis that had brought America and Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear disaster. So this film was released at the height of the Cold War. Both of these superpowers have understood very well the power of cinema as a propaganda tool, or as we would say today, a weapon of soft power. On the one hand, largely thanks to Hollywood, the Americans have colonized our subconscious, as one of the characters says in the 1976 film Kings of the Road, directed by Wim Wenders. Or as Andrew Hill puts it, Hollywood represents a type of film that is not so anchored in any particular quality of American culture that has universal appeal, but is more of a global event based on a long history of control over global distribution, resulting in widespread familiarity with Hollywood forms of cultural address. On the other hand, Lenin has famously declared that for us, cinema is the most important art. The Soviets have utilized the moving images to spread the message of the inevitability of socialist revolution. I Am Cuba is part of that ideological project. But in this paper, I intend to revisit this film from a perspective of transnationalism and assess the legacy of its formal and stylistic experimentation. The film consists of 4 episodes showing different aspects of life in Cuba in the late 1950s under the repressive and corrupt Batista regime. The fragmented narrative first follows a young woman forced into sex work with American tourists. Then a sugarcane farmer who learns that the land he has always worked is being taken over by the United Fruits Company. The third segment shows a brutal suppression of a student protest at the University of Havana. And in the final part, peasant's home and family are bombed for no apparent reason by the Air Force, prompting him to join the guerrilla uprising led by Fidel Castro against the Batista government. In the spirit of Cuban and Soviet collaboration, the film was scripted jointly by the 2 poets, Yevgeny Yevtushenko and Enrique Pineda Barnett. And the crew was also mixed, although the director Mikhail Kalatozov and the cinematographer Sergei Yuroshevsky were both Soviet. The 2 of them had previously worked together on the film The Cranes Are Flying, which was made in 1957. And it's a landmark work of the so-called thaw period when Nikita Khrushchev's policies resulted in a more varied forms of representation, marking a departure from the rigidity of socialist realism under Stalin. The Cranes Are Flying achieved significant international success, including the most prestigious film award, Cannes Palme d'Or, which is a reminder of another very potent form of cultural diplomacy in the context of cinema. The way in which leading Western film festivals such as Cannes, Venice, and Berlin tend to celebrate the cinema with strong political message, often providing the platform for the work of dissident non-Western directors. Back to I Am Cuba. The film turned out to be a visually stunning and formally daring piece of cinema. Of particular note is Yuroshevsky's innovative camera work, including the use of high contrast infrared film stock, resulting in a heightened dramatic effect in the shots depicting Cuban nature. And you see some film stills on the next slide. The use of unusual angles, imaginative use of lenses, filters, and lighting concepts, but above all, It's the use of acrobatic, mobile, long takes that would seem impossible to achieve even with modern technology, such as Steadicam, which obviously wasn't around at the time. Nevertheless, the film was not well received at the time. It was criticized both in Cuba and in the Soviet Union, mainly for excessive formalism. And there's some notes on the next slide about the reception of the film. According to Hugo Olive, the Uruguayan filmmaker who worked at the Cuban Institute of Cinema, it was a kind of delirium for the camera. In addition to this, the critics felt that the film did not succeed in overcoming the traveler's view of Cuba and tropical exoticism. It was an image, as the other quote there says, of the island which Soviet revolutionary poetry inherited from Mayakovsky's visit in the 1920s. Likewise, in the West, the film wasn't a success at the time. It was dismissed as communist kitsch by some. And you see that there was a review of the film in Cineast magazine that said that the film's greatest defect is that its visual brilliance far outshines its simplistic social and political vision, which is a throwback to the worst of socialist realism applied to the political ideological battles of the Cold War. The American critics were particularly annoyed by the simplistic one-dimensional representation of American characters in the film. But in response to these claims of overt formalism, Gruszewski himself said that there cannot be art beyond the form, alluding to Sergei Eisenstein's revolutionary cinematic experiments from the silent era, the time of the Soviet avant-garde, which is today known as the Soviet montage. He did admit, however, that the Russians involved in the project were not that familiar with Cuba, so they chose to approach it lyrically. Thus, the film was to be seen as a visual poem, in which case the content had to yield to imagery. It took 3 decades for this film to be rediscovered and restored. And this happened after the end of Cold War, somewhat ironically in America. After it was shown at the San Francisco International Film Festival in 1994, the American distribution rights were acquired by Milestone. And then the film was championed and promoted by Martin Scorsese, who presented it for 35mm distribution in art house theater across the country. According to the article in the esteemed film industry magazine, American Cinematographer, its visuals are as startling today as were those of Citizen Kane 55 years ago. The article also praises the film's determinedly different images and describes it as a feast for the eyes. In fact, the American Association of Cinematographers have voted it as one of the 100 most important films ever made. In his reading of I Am Cuba, Amit Takar draws on Mikhail Bakhtin's idea of Mikhail Bakhtin's notion of heteroglossia, which stands for a diversity of social speech types and a diversity of individual voices, artistically organized. We can begin to think about this on the most basic level, first of all, as the film opens with what is to be interpreted as the voice of Cuba, narrated in Spanish, which is accompanied by a Russian voiceover. But more importantly, the multiplicity of voices in the film also relates to the question of protagonism. Takar distinguishes between the social and fictional protagonism, and between the individual and the collective protagonism. Fictional protagonism can evoke the sense of agency needed for social action. And in this film, the force of that social action is shown to be dispersed across many different agents from a range of different social backgrounds who are united by the necessity of the revolution. As such, I Am Cuba eschews the conventional hero-led narrative, as often seen in historical drama centering on an individual protagonist, and instead builds a sense of collective protagonism. Or to take this idea further, in Scorsese's words, the main character is the country, the land, the soil. This polyvocality can be contrasted to the homogeneous and hegemonic discourse and industrial practice of commercial cinema. The state-subsidized production of I Am Cuba was conceived as a way of giving impetus to filmmaking on the island. The Soviet crew brought their own transport and equipment, which was then left behind in Cuba after the shoot. All of this prompted me to ask if Urushevsky's camera work can be seen as a precursor to Steadicam and the extremely long take of the digital era, whether it might be sensible to consider this Soviet-Cuban co-production as an early example of transnational cinema. While I'm no fan of retrofitting fashionable conceptual terms to past historical context, I am keen to explore possible ways of decentering and decolonizing film practice and film scholarship. And transnationalism is one such strategy that emerged in recent decades, partly as a reaction to the economic and cultural impact of globalization. The transnational turn was a consequence of the need to go beyond binary oppositions between the national and the foreign, the local and the global. Anna Singh suggests that we use globalization as part of the ideological rhetoric of globalism, whereas we use transnational to refer to specific transborder projects that actually constitute the growth of the transnational on the ground. According to Mette Hjort, the more valuable forms of cinematic transnationalism feature a commitment to ensuring that certain economic realities associated with filmmaking do not eclipse the pursuit of aesthetic, artistic, social, and political values. This is useful for distinguishing between transnational cinema as a consequence of an economic need for international co-production in the interest of cutting profit margins, and transnational cinema as a form of cultural exchange. In this sense, transnational seems to be more apt as a framework for the understanding of I Am Cuba than the contemporaneous concept of the third cinema, the term coined in the 1960s by the South American filmmakers and Gatino. It should be acknowledged, however, that any attempt to apply these debates around transnationalism to I Am Cuba is ahistorical from the point of view which understands the notion of transnationalism as a resistance to globalization as cultural homogenization. That is to say, a rejection and a reaction to a unidirectional flow of globalization since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It would also be problematic for those who see the Soviet reach to the developing world as part of its own imperialist project. Finally, a few words about the legacy of the film and its artistic experimentation. Its dispersed protagonism, which I mentioned earlier, would have been an influence on Steven Soderbergh's film Chair, which was made in 2008, which, unlike the conventional biopic about an exceptional historical figure, does not show social change as a reflection or a consequence of an individual protagonist's personal change. Instead, the first part depicts the revolution in Cuba as an effect of a brutal and exploitative dictatorship which unites all social classes, the workers, the peasants, the urban middle class, in the struggle against it. The second part depicts the failure of the revolution in Bolivia precisely because the social, economic, and political conditions for it were not ripe. Nevertheless, it was another more recent film that prompted me to write this paper, and that film is Athena, directed by Roman Gavras. This film, released earlier this year and available on Netflix right now, depicts a riot at an estate in the Parisian suburb sparked by a killing of a young boy by a group of men dressed in police uniforms. The boy's brother, Karim, is the leader of this rebellion, and the story is centered around him and his conflict with the remaining two brothers. It's a narrative resembling a Greek tragedy or a Shakespearean drama. So, unlike I Am Cuba, it approaches the subject of social and political upheaval through the lens of individual protagonism. Yet its epic, kinetic visual style, led by the impressive mobile camera work, is undoubtedly influenced by Urushevsky's cinematography, especially, as in I Am Cuba, in its unforgettable opening sequence, a long take in which the camera moves through several different environments, seemingly becoming weightless in the end, as it shifts from being handheld to drifting away, carried by a mechanical device, which could have been a crane or a drone. The technical ingenuity here matches that of I Am Cuba, making every filmmaker scream, how did he do that? But the politics and aesthetics are always contextual, and the two films, whilst using very similar visual tropes to address the themes of social injustice, significantly diverge in their political messages. In Athena, the links between the individual and the social, and between the personal and political, are underdeveloped, and its urgency is undermined by its unwillingness to confront the systemic racism and police violence. Hence, the impressive visuals serve as an extension of the director's exuberant style, familiar from his eye-catching music videos for the likes of MIA, Jamie XX, and Jay-Z. In contrast, the politics and the aesthetics of I Am Cuba seem more closely aligned. In the words of Wes Rosen, commenting on the second incredible gravity-defying long take in I Am Cuba, a sequence in which the camera, passed between three different operators, travels from the sidewalk up the face of the building, then across the street, through the building, and then outside a window, ending suspended in the air above the funeral procession of a revolutionary martyr. In releasing the camera from the restrictions of the human body, the whole take demonstrates the spirit of the revolution. So there it is. Sorry, I think I've overrun a bit, but here's a reference list at the end. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Nikola. I would keep my questions that I would like to ask you for the last 15 minutes. So we will come back to you. Actually, I will, but I would like to now announce our second speaker, Jelena Drobac. Jelena, good afternoon. Hello, welcome. The title of the Jelena's presentation is Cultural Diplomacy, a case study of recent Hungarian-Serbian cultural relations. This presentation is supposed to be taken by Jelena and her colleague Predrag Maksic, but I would like to just announce, I heard that Predrag is running late and he will not be able to join. Anyway, Jelena is here, which is great enough. Jelena Drobac is she graduated from the Faculty of Applied Arts, a graphic design major. She received a Doctor of Arts degree at the Interdisciplinary Art Studies, University of Arts in Belgrade, in the field of digital arts. She's a professor at the Academy of Applied Technical Studies Belgrade and a head of the design department. She has been active on the design scene for nearly 20 years in the field of identity, typography, and packaging. Participating in over 50 group exhibitions in Serbia and abroad, her works have have been published in more than 50 design publications worldwide. She won more than 20 graphic design awards in France, Germany, the US, Russia, Slovenia, and Serbia. Jelena is a member of the Applied Artists and Designers Association of Serbia. Jelena, thank you for joining us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me. My presentation, I'll try to share my screen with you. Yes, hope this works. Okay, great. So my topic is cultural diplomacy and the case study of recent Hungarian-Serbian cultural relations. I have to tell everybody that actually Nataša suggested this, since we were quite active in the Hungarian scene as the academy, but as a Serbian scene, we did a lot of things in just the last few months in Hungary. So this is mainly my topic. One second. The issue is that this conference and our topics today will probably say is actually could it be a cultural diplomacy without an official state orchestrated strategy, structure, and execution? In the world that is changing, that we live in today, could that be? Could the social media and the changes of our everyday lives create something new in the view of the cultural diplomacy? So, as Robert Albro said, representing the nation through cultural spectacle, could that be cultural diplomacy, or should it be state executed, orchestrated, and planned? So this is one of the topics. In Serbia, we have like a really traditional structure of the cultural diplomacy, similar to China or France. We have government bodies, cultural centers, and official agreements. And the pillars of all of that are actually Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Serbia and Ministry of Culture. The first one, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, handles the first contact, the initiation, the signing, and storing of all those agreements, while the Ministry of Culture handles the strategy and execution afterwards. So this is like how it's all been strategized. Serbia has really a huge network of diplomatic missions, and only 2 actually cultural centers, even though there are a lot of cultural centers of Serbia all around the world. Only 2 are under the government. One is Beijing, one is Paris. So so when it comes to Serbian-Hungarian relationship as neighboring countries, we have a long intertwined history, but it's characterized between layers of cooperation, layers of conflict. And that will show you just in a moment the illustration and visuals of all of that. As 2 countries, we have Serbia and Hungary have official established relations since 1921, but in the last decade, the relationships between the 2 countries have been all-time high. Having a lot of agreements. In this moment, we have 153 signed bilateral agreements on all different fields except cultural cooperation, which is quite interesting to me. The 2 countries have diplomatic missions. So Hungary has an embassy in Belgrade and a general consulate in Subotica. On the other hand, Serbia has an embassy in Budapest and honorary consulate in Szeged. And both countries have exchanged cultural centers. So we have Hungarian Institute in Belgrade, open in 2014, which is operated by Hungarian government, while the Serbian Culture and Documentary Center is operated by Serbian minority Hungary. So both Serbia and Hungary have minorities in each other's countries and vivid relations concerning that. The complexity of Serbo-Hungarian relationships can be shown on this example, and it's a case study that I'll just jump through briefly. The case study shows I was asked as a designer to do graphic design or identity design for the Serbian Cultural Center. And due to our complex and long history, I decided to find people of value that will be the bridge between two ethnicities, 2 nations, 2 countries. And I did a little bit of research to find those people who are important for both countries and both cultures. So the first person that came to my mind was Pete Fischander. Pete Fischander is a national poet of Hungary. Every city in Hungary has its name, its street name somewhere. So he's quite big. But actually, he was born as Alexander Petrović to a Serbian father and a Slovakian mother. So for me, he was an ideal person to be the bridge between two nations. But people in Hungary told me, Hungarians told me that it will not be perceived the proper way, since he's the national poet of Hungary. So to find somebody else. So they pushed me towards to look into a man called General Damjanić. Also, along with Pete Fischander, most Hungarian cities have his name, street named after him. So I did a little research, and he is a great strategist and a great soldier for the Hungarian side, but also his greatest battle was against Serbia. So he is considered a traitor in the views and the eyes of the Serbian minority. So as you can see, history creates modern context complex. So I found these people that you can see on the right that are actually excellent ambassadors to the both countries and cultures. Maybe the most prominent one is Katarina Ivanović. She's a painter, and she was born in a Serbian household in Hungary, and she was equally proud of her Serbian heritage and her Hungarian upbringing. So she was an excellent example in that sort. Also, we have Joachim Vujić, the founder of First Theater. First Theater, actually, Serbian theater was founded in Hungary. And then Jako Ignjatović, also a writer. Brothers Nikola and Petar Dobrović, we'll talk about them a bit later. Sava Tikelija and Momčilo Tapavica, Jelena Vukajlović, so Kornelija Stanković. So all those like people are actually both known in Serbia and Hungary as great ambassadors and great bridges between those two countries and cultures. For me, it was really interesting to find out that Miloš Crnjanski, a Serbian classic writer, is not that visible and not that notable in both Hungarian and Serbian households. And for me, that was a shock, because he wrote about their lives. His most prominent work actually was about lives of people living in these borderline countries. While on the other hand, one of the household names in Hungary is actually Tihomir Vujić, who is completely unknown in Serbia. He's a famous composer and musician, and so a great difference between those two cultures can be seen through this example. For me, it was really interesting to dig a bit deeper and to see how Serbian and diplomatic relations are in this current moment. So we have 153 bilateral agreements between two countries, but has never been and has no agreement now on cultural cooperation. But if you take a look at what's going on in the Hungarian manifestation galleries, you can see a different perspective. Only in 2022 and the last 6 months, Serbia has been strongly represented in Museum Night, Budapest Design Week, and Serbia was a guest of honor on Budapest Art Market, just to name a few. So, but all of this were merits of individual contacts and efforts, and with little or no government support. So, does this make it our diplomacy in the traditional sense? That remains to be seen. So these are just snapshots from all those three exhibitions and three manifestations. We'll take a look now. The first one actually is about Nikola Dobrović. We mentioned Nikola Dobrović a few minutes ago. He was a Serbian architect and academic born in a Serbian household in Hungary. His brother is maybe more better known in Hungary, because he is Petar Dobrović. He's a painter. But Nikola Dobrović, upon finishing his architecture studies in Prague, moved to Serbia and became one of the creators of New Belgrade, new way of householding in ex-Yugoslavia, creating the whole another part of town in an inhabited location. And also he was well known and best known for designing the building of the Ministry of Defense of former Yugoslavia and Serbia, Generalstab. You can see here the now situation or now state of that building. It was bombed in 1999 and completely destroyed. It was also interesting that Belgrade International Week of Architecture this year was completely dedicated to him and to this building. The burning question in Serbian public, but in Serbian Architecture Society, is what is going to happen with this building, because a few years ago, when before Donald Trump became president, he came to Belgrade in an attempt to buy the building and create his own Trump Balkan Hotel instead of this building, and that fell through, but didn't fall through. But now is the question, since it has a lot of historical and architectural legacy, this building, what should happen now? So Academy of Applied Technical Studies Belgrade was asked to do a series of posters regarding his work and regarding his role in Serbian and European history. And so we dedicated a whole exhibition to his legacy, and this is the Belgrade exhibition concerning that. It took part in a Scandinavian pavilion, which is also part of the diplomatic efforts, since it was a gift during the Belgrade International Week of Architecture to Belgrade Faculty of Fine Arts by Norwegian architects. So it's completely done in the aesthetics of the Scandinavian house design, that it's not that common in Balkan region, and it was a gift after the BINA, or the International Week of Architecture. So after we did that workshop and exhibition in Belgrade, we decided to take Dobrović home. So we applied for the museum night of Budapest, and we were accepted. And so in a certain way, we took him home and represented the works and the legacy of Nikola Dobrović to Hungarian and wider audience. This was a really big event. It was the 20th Museum Night in Budapest, and there were more than 2,500 events organized by 431 institutions, and we took part. We held our exhibition in something that is called Tequilianum. This is photos from the exhibition and from the opening. But we held our exhibition in the gallery is part of the Tequilianum Palace. Actually, Tequilianum endowment is the second largest Serbian endowment outside Serbia, and this huge palace in downtown Budapest was a gift from Sava Tekelija to Serbian students. So it was founded in 1838, and it was actually used for like almost 2 centuries a dorm and scholarship fund for Serbian students. So Nikola Tesla, Lazar Kostić, and many other notable people lived here and received funds while studying in Budapest. So Matica Srpska was also founded here. So it's really interesting place to be. It's a lovely architecture and it's a lovely location. And but unfortunately, it was nationalized in 1952 by Hungarian state, and in 1996, only half of it was returned to the Sava Tekelija fund. So the remain is still under being sublet to the Serbian minority in Hungary. So this is like a little video of it, but I just push it through because we have like really a lot of things more to say, and I don't want to take too much of your time. The second manifestation where Serbia took place is actually at Art Market Budapest, and it's an international art fair that is leading in Central and Eastern Europe. And this year they had more than exhibitors from 40 countries and 30,000 international visitors in just this year. So Serbia was a guest of honor during that project that's called Most Serbia. That's also was a part of the, let's say, individual contacts and individual efforts by Mrs. Latinović. But later on, Serbian Ministry of Culture supported the manifestation and the Serbian pavilion during that. So these are all photos from it. And besides those like small independent galleries that were guest exhibitors, Serbia was part of the Art Photo Budapest, and also with 4 satellite exhibitions. So Mira Brtka was declared the best exhibition in Serbia in last year. So Mira Brtka was re-exhibited in Budapest during the art market, also collecting Serbia. The works that was collected by Nenad Kostić, which is one of the biggest Serbian living collectors. Art Without Borders, artists from Vojvodina in a Hungarian art scene, and Young Voices, the students from University of Arts in Belgrade, had an exhibition at the Hungarian University of Fine Arts. So it was like really intense 4 days in Budapest. And the third manifestation, and where we took part, in Academy of Applied Technical Studies Belgrade was applied and was accepted to, was actually Budapest Design Week. And we had a project that was supported from the Ministry of Education of Serbia, which is called Responsible Design, and we presented the final project of that concept to the international market. So it was quite interesting to see and to have different contexts with universities and students and professors and media throughout these days of Budapest Design Week. So the concept of this exhibition was what is responsible design, how to be sustainable, and how to what small steps can design students take in order to achieve bigger and better sustainable society. And these all are works from our students and professors. So I'll just show you that in a bit, and more or less, yeah. So this is basically an interesting last few months in Budapest when it comes to Serbian activities and Serbian artists. And the thing is, like I said, these all were more or less individual efforts, and but do those individual efforts count for a greater national outlook, or they're just outskirts of cultural diplomacy, or should they be considered as a more lively and more proactive diplomacy than official diplomacy? So that is a burning question when it comes to this aspect. And for me, it was really interesting to find out that despite all of the work and everything, we still have no official agreement on cultural exchange and cooperation between two neighboring countries that are a few hundred kilometers apart. So this is basically it. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jelena. Thank you very much for this presentation. I would like to ask you, I'm not sure, is Nikola present? Okay, he will be here. I will ask him later. It's okay,
Yeah,
you're here.
Yeah. Just turn my camera off, but of course.
Okay, I was not sure because okay. Actually, I wanted to ask you guys something. First, you, Nikola, and according to your presentation and this analysis of the film, I can see that. I mean, this is not something that I discovered, but it's a fact that there are some artistic results. They are evergreens, so they can be used in any time. Or the time doesn't mean a lot when we talk about some artistic productions. But as well, we can just leave them sometimes, like in case of this movie, I would say, we can leave them sometimes or for some time somewhere to sleep until we use them again as a good tool to maybe discuss about the context that we are at now. So I would say that this movie is again can be modern even today. So even today's situation, our position of discovering all these influences for different sides, I think it's not many things changed, at least in an aesthetic way, right?
I mean, I think the aesthetics of this film are they still seem fresh. And, you know, I was mentioning how lots of people looking at that film would say, how did it do that? Because it's still kind of quite unclear, even for us who work as filmmakers, to understand what they had to do. But I'm not sure how alive the idea of that film is, because I try to test it in the context of the current way of thinking about cultural collaboration and cultural diplomacy. And I'm not sure how successful my attempt was actually to apply this notion of transnationalism. I was also reminded of some things that actually are quite similar in relation to what I talked about and what Jelena just talked about. I've been to that Nikola Dobrović exhibition in Belgrade, and it's not just the Yugoslav Army headquarters that lie in ruins, it's also the incredible modernist hotel that he designed in Dubrovnik at Lopud called Grand Hotel, which is again a ruin. So all of these buildings, including probably my film and obviously the project of the Soviet Union, which collapsed, and the project of communist Cuba, which, you know, is there's so many issues with it in the 21st century. It seems to me that we're talking about things that are very much part of the modernist context, you know, of the 20th century and the modernist project and you know, modernity and the ideas that went along with modernity. And, you know, so it's one thing to look at the style that I described and the aesthetics in the context of modernism, which is very much the 1960s. And the context of postmodernism, or whatever we want to call the 21st century. So they mean different things. And I think that, you know, while similar visual tropes were used in Athena, which I mentioned, film made this year, which has attracted a lot of attention, the meanings, so to speak, are completely different. And I think also the kind of political urgency of it works in a very different way. So yeah, things shift. And I guess what film style means is always going to be contextual. So yeah, it looks fresh, but when it's used today, it seems to me, it looks like it means something different. I don't know if that makes sense and if I answered your question.
Yeah, sure. Jelena, please.
Yes, well, I was listening to your lecture, and I was just thinking of Lev Manović, who said in the 80s or 90s, I don't know, that well, because everything comes from avant-garde, you know, and the transnational and all that. But Lev Manović said that like everything will be just counting and recycling and counting and recycling. So the aesthetics is something new, but when you dig a little bit deeper, you found that it's just like the old masters stole our best ideas. So it's like a cycle that goes around and round and round. So because I teach typography, and I tell to my students, when you look at your phone, you see modern technology, but when you know avant-garde and you take a look at it, it's moderna. It's something that somebody said like a century ago. So it's recycled in a new way, but it's recycled. It's the grid, it's a transnational, it's, you know, so everything comes to a full circle, and then again.
I think it depends on the public as well, because we all communicate a lot with new generations. And we always maybe are in position to listen their approaches, and they are always new, or they're always at least different. On that line, I would like to ask you, Jelena, even though you're saying that you don't have an agreement, Serbia and Hungary are still in this in a cultural field, that very corresponds with the fact that what I'm trying to say with this conference, in a sense, is that cultural diplomacy is going out of this traditional kind of reading, that the agreement is necessary so we can start something. So you are already participating in many bilateral actions or events, and only in 2022 you had 3 of them. But I'm interested again in young people, so how they accept this on their level, how this communication, like very high now, very strong, how important that is for them. Do they, of course, they cannot see this communication and the international cooperation from our point of view, but are they looking forward to this exchange?
Well, yes, they are, but like I think they view the things a bit differently than us. I mean, when I went to college, there were no like exchanges and no such thing. There were no festivals. I mean, we lived a bit differently. The internet wasn't as big as it now, so for them everything is more accessible. So they don't see, I think they don't see the relevance of being there and doing the work, talking about it, and you know, so all of that, I don't think that I think they're too young to understand that in a certain way. But they participate, and we manage to convince them. But are they proactive? No.
Nikola, how did you test your approach or this kind of presentation and this analysis with your students? I mean, you teach at the academy in London, so how young people react?
I mean, not this particular film. I was just kind of inspired because I watched that film Athena just before I received an invitation, a night before I received an invitation to participate in this conference. And that's just how I thought about maybe using I Am Cuba as a case study. But yeah, I mean, I try to teach about when I teach film studies, I teach about a diversity of film histories and different film cultures, including traditions, but also audiences. And I think that is really important. I also teach at an international college, and I think that necessarily need to be reflected in the content that we have for our students here. And the students demand that also. But yeah, I wouldn't say when it comes to film studies that there is that much exposure or understanding of the diversity of film cultures. It's kind of quite limited. And it seems to me that, you know, the Anglo-American media is really, really dominant in that field. So it's kind of difficult to do anything about that. I think, you know, because we're used to that way of thinking about moving images and values associated with them, it's kind of hard to dismantle that, or not dismantle it, but just kind of look at a different form of visual or
Of course, and it's not only
Mhm.
only in the film. It's even how we project certain roles. It's not only about art, of course. It's television as well. This is the certain way that we expect how everything's supposed to look. And then if it looks in a different way, of if it acts differently, then it's strange and it's not aesthetically approachable.
Yeah, I mean, it's that thing about globalization. On the one hand, we have access to lots of different ideas, cultural forms, products, ideas, people, because of the increased kind of movement between national borders. But at the same time, you know, most people who are critical of globalization say that there's a kind of ugly imbalance of power, and that it's the West that seems to benefit from globalization, or America in particular. And in the context of culture, that kind of seems to be the case. And young people want to connect. But I think for them it's different. When I moved abroad when I was in my early 20s, it seemed like such a dramatic thing, and I was kind of, you know, really upset that I'm away from home and it'll take a long time for me to go back home. I think young people today, they don't seem, it doesn't seem that dramatic for them, because they spend most of their time online anyway. So they, you know, you go to another country, but you're still hanging out with your friends on social media and so on. So maybe it's not as dramatic. So that's changed.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to just a quick note. When I was studying interdisciplinary studies, like a visual artist, a graphic designer, for me, the most precious thing I brought from those studies is actually history of cinema, because we had a genial professor who showed us tons and tons of movies that weren't that easy attainable. So it was really like from Japanese war documentaries to Czechoslovakian film legacy to all. So it makes completely sense, and you draw so many parallels with visual arts and cinema that I nowadays I don't see where's the line between those two. So it's really interesting to add that component of not just social, but also transdisciplinary artistic education.
Mute. Okay, here I am. I think in this sense, cultural diplomacy is interesting because I think it's reshaping and changing. As I said at the beginning, its position and a view in a sense. And even though for decades it was an instrument, I think somehow now we are not, but somehow we are managing to be in a similar position, because it looks like in the general cultural map that we are all invited, so we can all take a part, so we can even discuss these issues here, there, everywhere. So it's not something that it's imposed. I mean, it's a lot about perception, I think, and it's a lot about can we discuss all these artistic expressions and aesthetics among us? So I think it's somehow interesting time for these topics.
Absolutely, I agree. But what we mustn't forget is that there are structural issues that define how cultural diplomacy works. So this kind of connection between culture, economy, and politics is an important one. To give you an example, again, from the film industry and cultural diplomacy, probably most often cited great example of soft power or cultural diplomacy is South Korea, and how the Korean wave, cultural wave, including music, TV, and cinema, which has kind of promoted Korean culture, history, and it's been a global success and one that many people have studied. But this has been a concerted effort by the government and different structures of, you know, in Korea to establish these cultural forms, to promote them. And I was reading about the trade deal between America and Korea. And to go back to cinema, Korean cinema is partly as successful as it is because it's state subsidized. There's a lot of money that was invested in the film industry for it to become so good, as good as it is, and acclaimed, you know, critically and successful at the box office. But there were trade negotiations between American and Korean governments that went on for a very, very long time before the trade deal was signed to enable preferential deal for Koreans to, you know, export their products to America and vice versa. But at each round of these negotiations, the American delegates demanded that the Koreans lift their quotas from their cinematic industry. Meaning that, you know, in Korea, like in France, there is a prescribed number of films that must be shown in Korea's cinemas that are domestic, which protects home film industry and production. And the Americans were demanding that they lift these quotas and liberalize their production. And so you see how it's part of politics to actually look at culture and how it is produced. That's why I was interested also to hear, and somewhat disappointed to hear from Jelena about the fact that there isn't actually a sustained strategy or official agreement when it comes to collaboration and cooperation between Hungary and Serbia, two countries that are so closely linked geographically, culturally, historically, economically, and in every other sense.
Yeah, and the politics is all-time high in the last decade. So even today, our president is with Hungarian president. So we have mutual government sessions and twice a year and things like that, and still no cultural agreement, which for me is really interesting, since we have so many ties, political, economical, historical, you name it. So.
Okay, so the structure is important, right? The structure is number one. That's the conclusion.
Well, in Serbia, it's formed that way. You have different ways of forming it. Like Britain has a non-government institution called British Council, which actually is in a form government, but it's not government. So it's formed a bit differently. But in most of the region, most of the countries, this region, it's the structure is really traditional and formal. So everything I showed you is just individual effort that sometimes, you know, somebody says, okay, we'll support you, we'll take pictures, and some other times they just don't acknowledge it to happen. But I mean, I think due to everything we just said, due to the social media, the democratization of media in such way, I think that's about to change, because we live in a challenging times where many things changed. Like you were talking about, you know, industry, film industry. In Serbia, we had a big boom of not cinema industry, but television production industry. Well, you have like two companies that are in a rival situation, and they invest a lot of money. So Serbia, as cultural diplomacy force, we gain from their rivalry, because we have Serbian shows on Netflix, on Amazon, whatever, because those two companies are investing and creating a thing called Serbia, you know, TV show. And that was a almost, you know, extinct thing.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Although I'm not sure about leaving it to the forces of the market to regulate these things. It's not always the most successful formula. I was wondering if Suzanne from American Embassy is still around. Maybe she could tell us if there's a particular strategy that they use in terms of, you know, themes that they prioritize or anything like that. Would be interesting. Be interesting for us who come from small cultures to learn from the practices of those cultures, you know, that are more powerful.
I would say that this, I'll just make a comment that this now, the situation that is happening in a field of cultural diplomacy is like two developed groups that they are traditionally strong and in this cultural diplomacy sense important old cultures with developed soft power mechanisms are becoming similar to each other, while you have all this group of small or medium size or countries created through different out of one country, like in our case or in some other regions, they are all in other continents, that they are composing the second group. So there is a traditional way, standard way of communication through cultural diplomacy, and there is so many these international connections, structures, projects, and exchange that they are actually shaping cultural diplomacy. That's what I think it's important. I mean, it's important when we talk about small countries like Montenegro's case, or in this sense, there is a space for some extra activities or for some new readings or new kind of models for communication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we live in times when everything's changing, so everything is developing just before our eyes. So I believe that as much as our lives will change in the last 2 years, I believe that some structures will have to be modified to be sustainable. So this is one of those, like, you know, cell phones and social media has never been stronger than now. And in that term, they created a lot of shifts. Some are good, some are bad, but the shift is the power. So the media doesn't have that much power that they used to have, the traditional media, the traditional ways of broadcasting anything. So I think the diplomacy is a part of that story.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's time for us to wrap up this session. I would like to discuss with you a lot of things and issues, but I think we are running out of time. I'm not sure, did I tell you at the beginning that these sessions will be recorded and will be modified in a sense of separate sessions, so you will be you will have it as one package when all the conference is over. I would like to thank you again and to invite you to, if you find some time, to check other sessions starting tomorrow morning at 11:30.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Hvala, Jelena.
Ciao.
Do viđenja.
Hvala vam.